Okay, so have a good night. In California, I'm here, David Haelterman, in Cali, in Colombia, and I'm pleased to present you a talk about the Stanhopeae subtribe, which means the Stanhopea and other related orchids in Colombia. This talk I will introduce first Colombia, because it's a country that's not very well known apart from the problems it had in the past with its history, the conflicts and all these things. But fortunately, this has changed a lot, and so I try always through these talks to show another image too, because it's an incredible country anyway for nature, for orchids and other things. Just present myself very shortly. I'm from Belgium initially. I'm living in Belgium, in Colombia, for 10 years now, and I'm an agronomist, but work as a tourism guide, specialized on orchids and botany here in Colombia now for 5-6 years around this, and run tours by myself or for agencies. Travel agencies all over the country to see orchids in the wild and in cultivation and other plants and some birds and things like this. So my talk today, as I was telling you, is about the Stanhopea subtribe in Colombia. And you have the first Stanhopea that I shot in the wild, blooming in the wild. So, you know, it's probably some of you or most of you know that Stanhopea don't bloom for a long time, generally 3 to 4 days. So I was very lucky to see the species twice in the wild blooming, which is Stanhopea reichenbachana, which is from Colombia and Ecuador. Very special species, very scented and very nice one. Can be completely white or white with some purple inside the lip. It's just an example to introduce. But this is a special site and difficult to see in the wild in flower. I will have another one that I will show you also, which is growing just in the forest next to where I live. I'm living in a forest actually, but like 5 minutes walking from my home, there's Stanhopea schilleriana, which is an endemic species from Colombia, which means it's exclusive from Colombia. It doesn't exist in any other countries. You have the plant on the right blooming on a tree in the forest, and on the left a flora I picked because I also make orchid investigation. So sometimes I need to get some flowers, keep them in alcohol, make good pictures, and registration, because there are a lot of orchids that are not well studied in Colombia or not registered yet. This is a particularly nice one. So as I was telling you, I will introduce first a little bit about the country, because to understand the diversity and richness of Colombia, you have to understand a bit better the country. So we have a map here from internet, which is a map of Colombia with some topography map, and you can see. I'm gonna move my. Can you see the arrow moving?
Yes, we can see your cursor.
Okay. So yeah, there are some big regions in Colombia. So first, introduce Colombia is a country, the first country entering South America, connected to Panama, which is the last country in Central America. You can see it with my arrow. And then we have Venezuela, which is on the northeast and east side of Colombia. Brazil, bordering Brazil in the southeast. Peru and Ecuador in the south. And then Colombia, I have to mention, is the only country in South America having access to both oceans, which means the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean with the Caribbean Sea. All of the countries just have access to one ocean. Of course, in Central America, other countries have access to both oceans, but in South America, it's the only countries which has access to both oceans. The main regions in Colombia are, of course, everybody have heard about the Amazon. So Colombia has its piece of the Amazon rainforest in the southeast, which is bordering Ecuador, Peru, and Brazil. My arrow disappeared, but I hope it will come back. Yeah, here. So all this region is the Amazon in Colombia. It's a very unexplored region in Colombia. Some species are shared in orchids and animals and other plants with the neighboring countries, of course. Some are typical of Colombia and exclusive from Colombia in this region too. This is one of a big area, flatlands, very warm and humid, as all the Amazon. But then if you go a bit norther, in the northeast, you have another region, which is the what is called the Llanos region in Colombia, which is savanna, mainly savanna, more a bit kind of African landscape with savannas with gallery forest. So you have mainly orchids in the trees around the gallery forest, the rivers, and not that much in the savanna, although you have terrestrials also in the savanna, of course. And then you have what is the main richness of Colombia is in the mountains. So all these, the two first region I showed you or explained you are flatlands, but then we have a lot of mountains in Colombia. It's a very mountainous area of the world and of Latin America. And you have three main mountain ranges, which makes the main diversity and richness of Colombia, because you have an eastern mountain range, a central mountain range, and a western mountain range. So in the eastern mountain range, which is this, I don't know why this arrow sometimes moves, disappear. Okay, this eastern mountain range above the Amazon and above these flatlands, the savanna lands in the north, the east of Colombia, is where Bogota, the capital city of Colombia, is located. I have show it with my arrow here, just in the middle of the eastern mountain range. Then, if we go up the eastern mountain range and down again on the other side, we have a wide river valley, which is the Magdalena River Valley, which is the longest and most important river in Colombia, flowing from south to north towards the Atlantic and the Caribbean Sea. Then after this river valley, we have the central mountain range, of course, in between, which is a very volcanic area with volcanoes, peaks towering around 17,000 feet with permanent snow. And of course, under this permanent snow line, we have a lot of kind of forest going from warm forest to very cold forest and alpine forest. Then we go on the other side of this central mountain range. My arrow again disappeared a little bit, like, and we have another big river, which is the second main river in Colombia, the Cauca River, which is also flowing from south to north and entering, flowing until the Magdalena River, which is the main one I mentioned before, towards the Caribbean Sea. And then on the other side of this river, we have the western mountain range where I live, where Cali is located. I'm showing Cali here in southwestern Colombia, which is the third city. I forgot to mention that in the central mountain range, you have the second city, which is Medellin. So Bogota, in the middle of the eastern mountain range, Medellin, the second city, Bogota is being the capital, Medellin, the second city in the central mountain range, and Cali, the third city in the western mountain range. If I go on the other side of this mountain range, I go towards the Pacific mountains and lowland. And this is a very important area in Colombia too. Apart from the Andes mountains, the three main mountain ranges, three divisions of the Andes mountains, we have the Pacific lowlands, which is called the Choco. So the Choco is the wettest place on earth. So few people know it, but in some places you have, I don't know in feet how much and how you would measure the rain, but if I speak in meters, it can rain between 8 to 15 meters a year, which means 8 to 15 times more than the average quantity of rainfall in USA or in Europe, which is incredibly humid and wet all year round with no dry season, or almost no dry season. So of course you have a lot of orchids in this region. Moreover, this region is still very covered with forest, rainforest, even much wetter than in the Amazon. And then another region which is very important too is the northern part of Colombia, where you have flatlands again, warmer climates, but much drier than on the Pacific. So it's another kind of ecosystem with different orchids, of course, because you have there a strong dry season, so orchids that had to adapt to this kind of environment. And in this northern flatlands, you have like a fourth mountain range, a smaller one, which is called the Santa Marta mountain range. I will show it with my arrow. My arrow is here. It's kind of triangular shaped on the map, and it's where the highest peak in Colombia are located. And so you have snowy peaks, but these are not volcanoes. And this also another interesting region, because the World Wildlife Fund said like some years ago that this is the place on Earth we have the highest rate of endemism, which means of unique species for a region. So you're nowhere else on Earth you have so many species of plants, insects, birds, animals present, concentrated in a small area. So this is what makes it important on the biodiversity point of view. And also it's important because it's not the highest mountain range in the world, of course, because the Himalaya, for example, is much higher. But it's the highest mountain range next to an ocean. So you have the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean, and you go from sea level to around 18,000 feet in 35 to 40 kilometers. So it's very, very steep and very diverse in ecosystems. So like this, you have a better idea of Colombia landscapes or topography. And this is just a text which reminds exactly what I said. We call inter-Andean valleys, these valleys in between the mountain ranges with the Cauca and Magdalena River, as I was telling you. Here you have the name biogeographic Choco, which means all this wettest region on Earth, which extends from southern Panama to northern Ecuador and extending all over the Pacific lowlands of Colombia. This is a map a bit more simple, but where you can see all these regions. In Colombia, we call Orinoquia the savanna plains, because it's all the waters flowing from the Andes mountains, the eastern mountain range, towards these flatlands, savanna and gallery forest, go through to the Orinoco River, which is the second main river in Latin America, and then towards the Atlantic. And all the waters going southeast go to the Amazon River, so the first main river in Latin America. So we have some pictures to illustrate this. And here is the region that is considered the river that is considered to make the limit between the beginning of the Amazon on the right and the beginning of the end of the savanna plains. So of course it's not as sharp like this, that on one picture you can see on one side just savannas and on the other side just rainforest, but it goes progressively from savannas to rainforest. And of course this river is considered the place where it really changes in between the two regions, which is called the Guayabero River. Then we have a site of these steep mountains in the eastern mountain range. So you can see that it's very lush, very green, a lot of orchids, of course, and you won't have the same species of birds, of orchids, of animals in the bottom of the canyon than on top where you have cloud forest. So it's much warmer and a bit less humid in the bottom, and then you go into the clouds and it's much colder and wet all year round because of the clouds and the humidity, of course. And you have a different orchids depending on altitude and variations in humidity. So in the same region, you can have a lot of different ecosystems too and different orchids. This is another example in the central mountain range in a higher Andes place. The Andes mountains. So here we are around, let's say 8,000 feet high, and you have the Combeima River in the bottom, and then you have steep cliffs, forests, and then steep cliffs with other kind of forests above the cliffs. So all this makes, to illustrate you the diversity and what makes the diversity in countries like Colombia, but of course also Ecuador or Peru, which are the difference in altitude makes that you lose temperatures each time you go a bit upper, and you change the flora and the kind of orchids you find roughly each 300 meters going up, which would be like in feet, I think 900 feet, 1,000 feet more or less. Then you have a pretty big change or turnover in species going each time you go upper, like 900 feet higher. Then we go, if you go very high in the mountains, above 10,000 feet high, 3,000 meters, then you have a special vegetation, which is called the paramo ecosystem. So you have the name here, paramo ecosystem, which would be the equivalent for Europe or USA, probably, for the alpine ecosystem. And so you have a kind of vegetation which is composed of shrubs instead of big trees, and these plants, which are Espeletia species from the dandelion or sunflower family, the Asteraceae family. Here they are blooming, so you can see there are flowers similar like dandelion or or sunflowers. And so these plants can be very old because some species grow only 1 centimeter a year, which means that some of these plants can reach like 6 meters high, which means 600 years old. And then you can have snowy peak. This one is not a permanently snowy peak. This is a volcano which is not high enough to have permanent snow, but it had snowed some days before and it can stay for a week up there. And so in this kind of ecosystem, you still find orchids like terrestrials from very cold climate, and also some epiphytic species like Maxillaria, Stellis, Pleurotalis, Masdevallias from very high altitude, very cold ones. Then when we go above Cali, where I live, you have some suburbs of Cali here in the valley at the feet of the mountain. And then we are in the western mountain range at a moment where there is a pass, a place where there is a pass from one side of or to the other of this mountain range. But this day was particular, and that sometimes happens. It rained, and then rain stops, and you have the clouds above the valley. Under the clouds, it's a very wide valley with the Cauca River underneath. And then we can see the central mountain range above the clouds. So we are on one mountain range, and we can see the other one on the other side. And you can see a snowy peak here, which is Huila volcano, which is around 16,000 feet high, with permanent snow line and all of snow above it. And it's an active volcano. So one day it could get more active. For a moment, it's pretty quiet, but who knows? So you have a very spectacular landscape also in Colombia, like these kinds of things. This is another view on the western mountain range, but on its east flank. It's just to illustrate that you can have humidity, of course, and clouds forming, and because the condensation, for example, in the night it can be cold, and the sun rises, it warms everything. Then the humidity of the trees, the evaporation or transpiration of the trees creates clouds, mist, and then in the afternoon it rains, which is the more typical pattern of rainfall in Colombia. And then if you would go on the other side of this mountain range, then you go down to the Pacific side, and it's much wetter. I was telling you because the humidity of the Pacific side in Colombia is very, very high. So we have some very wet cloud forests like this one on tops of this or next to the pass of these mountains. This is the kind of habitat of Dracula chimera, if you know it. It's one of the biggest flower Dracula. It's endemic from Colombia and endemic from the western mountain range, which means it just exists in this mountain range in the world, just above Cali, where I live. This is on the Pacific side, the high mountains on the Pacific side. This is the highest point in the western mountain range, which is Tatama National Park, a very spectacular place, be it for landscape as for diversity. It's incredible to see birds. It's incredible to see orchids and any kind of plants, bromeliads, heliconias, etc. Many species very restricted to valleys or creeks, etc. So it is very conserved. You can see it's completely forested. And many people go to see birds or orchids in this region. And so this is going from very high, around 13,000 feet. No, there's no permanent snow because it's not high enough. But as you go down and down and down, it gets warmer and warmer, and you change the flora and the kind of forest you find. This is a river flowing almost in the lowlands on the Pacific side. So you can see it's very lush. It's hilly or mountainous. You have cloud forests above against, as we saw on the other side of Colombia in the eastern mountain range, and on the lowlands around the river, it's very warm. And you have so many species, and also, of course, parrots, toucans, and all these tropical birds, flocks of them, and it's pretty conserved. So, as I was telling you, Colombia hosts many ecosystems, which sometimes vary very slightly from one region to the other. Even above Cali, where I live, you can go in a place in a canyon or a creek, a big creek, and then you find some species, and you go just 10 kilometers north, and you have just 20 species in common. So it completely changes, and which is very important to understand these kind of countries, and why it's so important to conserve these mountains and these forests. Is that it's not because you go to the same kind of forest in the same region that you will find the same orchids or animals. So it's very super diversified on micro scale, and so you have a lot of places with, I don't know, in some creek you will have some kind of Draculas, and you go 10 or 20 kilometers north or south, and you have another species of Dracula, and it's just restricted to this creek or this canyon in the world. So which means that it's very important to conserve all this. All these microclimates, as I was explaining a little bit, changing with altitude and humidity, and habitats, natural habitats, depend on different factors, which are, for example, the presence of dry season or not, and the length of this dry season. So if there's no dry season, of course, you have orchids that are not at all able to withstand dryness. And if you go in a place where you have a slight dry season, then have species with small pseudobulbs adapted to this kind of like 2-3 months long length dry season. And then if you go in places where it's much drier, plants have to withstand 6 months without rain or 9 months without rain, and it completely changes the kind of biological adaptation of orchids and other plants. The altitude, of course, as I was telling you, is mainly influencing temperatures. The exposition to light, it sometimes also plays a role. Then you have a canyon, and on one side, if it's received early morning sun, and then generally I was telling you, you can have a lot of sun in the morning and the afternoon rainfall. And so if you have sun hitting the mountain in the morning, and then in the afternoon it rains, but on the other side of the canyon in the morning you don't have the sun hitting the forest, so it's fresher and it's not as exposed to light, and in the afternoon it rains. So in front of where you were in the morning, you go to the other side of the canyon and you have also a difference of ecosystem because you have places which are darker and with more humidity all year round than just in front of you 1 kilometer away. Rainfall and mist patterns are very important too. For example, if you go in the biogeographic choco, which is this wettest region on Earth between southern Panama and northern Ecuador, and also all around the Pacific Ocean in Colombia, it's much wetter at the same altitude. So when you read in the book that these orchids grow from, let's say, 5,000 to 600,000 feet high, it doesn't mean it's the same depending on where it is in Colombia or in between Colombia and Mexico, etc. This is not the same temperature. For example, if I go on the eastern side of the mountain range where I live, I have to go there, for example, 6,000 feet to find some orchids from cloud forest. And on the other side, I can go maybe to 4,000 feet and I have the same species. So it's just because it's fresher and more humid because it's the Pacific. So this has an influence too. And sometimes just because the mist enters in the canyon and not in another one, it also completely changes the. Sorry, I'm going to drink something. It completely changes the humidity patterns also because of the mist entering or not in this region. Let's speak a little bit now after I introduced Colombia and its diversity and why you have so many orchids and so many diversity, because Colombia is now considered the richest orchid country on Earth. Few people know it still, but we have even more species than Ecuador, which is the neighboring countries, like 300, 400, 500 more species, and we are above 4,500 species, which is 10 times more than Belgium, where I'm coming from initially. 100 times more, excuse me. In USA, I don't know how many you have. I think 250 species or something like this. In Colombia, 4,500 and more. And so I'm going to introduce now the Stanhopea Subtribe, which means the kind of orchids we will speak about today. So a bit of taxonomy, very quick. You know, the family is Orchidaceae, or the orchids, the one big family. Excuse me. One very big family, the more diverse family. Excuse me. Of a plant on Earth. I have a big problem. A little bit. Okay. And so this group of orchids, Stanhopea, Gongora, etc., are grouped in the subfamily Epidendroideae, around 5,000 species among 300 genera. So it means that, for example, Epidendrum from Latin America, Coryanthes and Agricum from Africa, Elophia mainly from Africa, to Catasetum from Latin America, or Cymbidium and Phalaenopsis from Asia, or Vanda, are in the same subfamily. Then the Stanhopea, or Stanhopea and Gongora genera. Then this is also, the Stanhopea are classified into the tribe Maxillaria, which means a level of classification under the subfamily division. And so Stanhopea are also close to Dicea, Kefersteinia, Lycaste, Maxillaria, Oncidium, and Telipogon, for example. And then we go a level lower or more precise, which is the subtribe Stanhopeae, which groups a lot of genera we will see now. The main genera, or the one that's better known, is Stanhopea, which means this, the one we speak now, which gave its name to the subtribe Stanhopeae. We have around 18 species of Stanhopea in Colombia, but 76 species in total in Latin America. So it gives you a perspective of how many species we have in Colombia versus the total of species of this genera. So Stanhopea is very well known generally, hanging flowers or inflorescences, very scented, very big flowers. We'll see examples afterwards. Another genus that which is very well known is Gongora. So with smaller flowers, but more flowers on flower spikes, and very scented too. And we have around 30 species over 72 species. So almost half species of Gongora already described are present in Colombia. Then we have Acineta, which is also grown and sometimes hybridized by men with Stanhopea. Also hanging inflorescences, we have 12 species over 15 species known. So you see the quantity of species we have in Colombia. So many species, almost all species of Acineta already described are present in Colombia, which means that Colombia is the center of distribution of this genus, which means this genus Acineta was born in Colombia and then diversified in Colombia, and then some species managed to get out of Colombia and reach neighboring countries. But it's in Colombia that you will find main diversity of Acineta. And this is also a feature we can see in other very important genera, which are very famous, like Anguloa, for example, the tulip orchids. Then, which are not from this subtribe. Then we have some less known genera which are present in this subtribe and so close to Gongora, to Acineta, to Stanhopea, which is, for example, Syrea or Syrea, I don't know how you would pronounce it in USA, which is endemic from Brazil. So it's not present in Colombia. We won't see it in detail, of course, but if you have some plants that you grow, they also have hanging inflorescences, scented flowers, and they are close to Stanhopea too. Coryanthes, which I will explain a bit more about afterwards, which is also a known genus because of the kind of flowers which trap insects and then release them. They are not insectivorous or carnivorous plants, but they trap insects and then release them. I will show the mechanism afterwards. We have 14 over 61 species already described. Embrea, which is very similar to Stanhopea. So all these genera have hanging inflorescence. So you have to grow them in baskets, for example. If not, the inflorescence will rot in a pot. Or mounted. You can grow them mounted, of course, provided that you give them enough humidity and water. Then you have Haelteria. You can sometimes see some Haelterias. And we have 7 over 9 species. So again, Colombia is the center of distribution of Haelteria. These can be hanging or erect inflorescences, so going upright or downwards. We have Aricia. I will not detail it because it's only from Costa Rica and Panama, not present in Colombia. And Janiella, which are 5 species, sometimes separated from Haelteria. We have Kegeliella, which is a very rare genus, very small forest, but very nice one, which is present in Colombia. La Cena, Luedemania. So all these are much less known, all with hanging inflorescences. Paphinia, maybe you know a bit better. Paphinia because you have a hybrid which is now commercialized, which is Paphinia majestic, or you have Paphinia cristata, which is pretty well known from the Amazon. Very nice flowers. We'll see pictures of this afterwards. 7 over 16 species. You see again half species, almost half species are present in Colombia. Polycycnis, again, half species are present in Colombia, the center of distribution of this very handsome genera. Paphinia has hanging inflorescences. Polycycnis, it depends on species. Schlemia is some very strange species, genus we will see afterwards. Civekingia, again, almost half species present in Colombia, hanging flowers again. Soterosanthus, which is present in Colombia, have just one species, which has been separated from Civekingia maybe 20 years ago. And then a very, very rare genus, one probably of the genera that is less known and less seen. Even the best producers of orchids in Colombia, very few have seen the Trevolia. I've seen some plants in the wild. I've not seen them blooming, but I hope to see them one. We have at least 4 out of 5 species. So almost all species are present in Colombia. Very, very, very rare and very, very difficult to see in nature and in cultivation. And finally, Vazqueziella, which I will not detail because it's only from Bolivia and Peru and not present in Colombia. But then I will show you pictures and spectacular species of all these genera. Just to mention you that there are 3 genera which have been recently separated from the Stanhopea subtribe. They were included in this subtribe, but they have been separated, which are Eriopsis, Lycomormium, and Peristeria. So botanists have created a special subtribe for them, so it's called Coeliopsidini, but it's very close to Stanhopea. And then we have even, it's an anecdotic maybe, but it's a special genus which is called Archivea, because it's a genus which is only known from a drawing at Kew Botanical Garden in England, the main botanical garden in the world. And so it's only known from a drawing. No plant has been found, no herbarium specimen, and it's been called Archivea because it's nice, like an archive. We don't know the plant. Nobody has seen the plant unless the person who drew it like 150 years ago. And it was just something that was in the herbarium of Kew as a drawing. And when Christensen and Rudolf Jenny found it, they described it as Archivea kewensis because it's an archive from Kew Botanical Garden. So it's something special, strange in the orchid world. So let's detail a little bit how Stanhopea subtribe genera grow. We have an example here with Acineta murray, which is an endemic species, an exclusive species from Colombia. And we can see the same species can grow whether epiphytic on the left picture, growing on a big stand or a big tree, big branch, with hanging inflorescences here. And then we have the same species in the same forest and some growing terrestrial. I don't know if this forest at one moment has been altered and some plants failed because there was some deforestation in place and the plant adapted as terrestrial, or if it's just an exception that this one was growing on a tree, but it's very strange. There's only one plant on a tree and all the rest of the population is on the ground. But this plant, when it bloomed, had to get its inflorescence, which is hanging, getting out of the soil, the superficial soil, and it grew for 7 months because I saw when it began to make a spike, and I followed it, and I had to come back for 8 times in this forest during 7 months to finally see it opening its flowers. So it has to make its way in the ground until it got out and formed the buds and then bloomed, and it was impressive. 21 flowers, very scented, and I have a friend just next to it to show the size. The plant is a meter tall, like 3 feet tall. So the plant morphology we generally see in Stanhopea is that they have single to multiflowered, erect, or pendulum inflorescence, which means a flower spike, which mainly can be hanging, but sometimes can be can go upright. They can have just one flower or a lot of flowers on each flower spike, depending on species and genera. Most species present monofoliate or bifoliate pseudobulbs, which means with 1 or 2 leaves on top of pseudobulbs, sometimes to 3 or 4 leaves, but that's not common. The pseudobulbs are grouped together. They don't have a long rhizome in between pseudobulbs, so it's like clusters of pseudobulbs. And the leaves are mostly plicate, which means with strong nerves visible on the underside of the leaves. So it's easy to find this, a bit like in Lycaste, you have strong nerves and plicate leaves. And you have a short to long petiole, which unites the pseudobulb with the leaves. We have also single to multi-flowered inflorescence, as I was telling you. So you have an example on the left side. So these are pictures to illustrate this botanic traits. We have Embrea rhodygasiana, which is close to Stanhopea. You can see they make single inflorescence. This one has 2 flower spikes, but each flower spike has only 1 flower spike, but very big flowers, very tender. So single inflorescence or uniflowered, and then a Stanhopea gibbosa here in cultivation. And you can see that the flower spike, there are 2 flower spikes, they are multi-flowered. They can have like 2, 3, 4, until 12 or 13 flowers per spike, very big flowers. So this is a typical multi-flower spike. We can have, as I was telling you, erect or pendulous or hanging inflorescence. We have a young guy I was teaching about some orchids, was interested in birds, but then began to get interested in orchids too, and like to make pictures. And you have Haelterman odoratissima. The leaf is this. You can see the plicate leaf with the strong nerves mark, very long peduncle here, uniting the pseudobulbs here to the leaf. Here we see another leaf, and then the erect inflorescence with pretty big flowers going upright. And then you have a picture of my person with a Acineta murray blooming terrestrial with the hanging flower spike. Example of morphology. So you can see again the plicate leaves, very strong nerves, very marked, long peduncle uniting the leaves to the pseudobulb. This is Stanhopea candida on a very big trees in the Amazon region in situ, which means in the wild. And on the right, Paphinia rugosa or close to rugosa. You can see that this one can have 3 to 4 leaves, plicate, so strong nerves, but not a lot of them like in Stanhopea. Smaller pseudobulbs, these are smaller plants. A hanging inflorescence that was not blooming at this moment. And short peduncle. You don't have a long peduncle like this, uniting the pseudobulb to the leaves. These are 2 other examples. Stanhopea reichenbachiana with a tourist from Belgium, from my country, original country, during a tour. And you can see the branch over him and just a plant of Stanhopea reichenbachiana over him with 2 leaves, again with the strong nerves very marked in the leaves, just above him. It was not blooming, but still nice to see how they grow. And then a Gongora species in situ, which means on its tree in the wild, on mossy trees. Gongora have 2 leaves of pseudobulb. Stanhopea have 1 leaf per pseudobulb. This is a way to distinguish them if they're not blooming. So some example of commonly seen Stanhopea in cultivation. So probably most of you have seen this species, which is Stanhopea tigrina, on the picture on the right, which is from Mexico. It just exists in the wild in Mexico, but it's grown worldwide because it's the biggest flower Stanhopea. Flowers very huge, like 18 centimeters wide, which would be probably like 6 inches wide. Very, very strongly scented. It just gives 1, 2, or sometimes exceptionally 3 flowers per spike, because the flowers are so huge that it won't give like 10 flowers on 1 flower spike. But if you have an old plant, you can have a plant with 5, 6, 8 flower spikes and have flowers for a while. And then other species that are pretty well known and cultivated are Stanhopea oculata from Central America, Stanhopea wardi from southern Central America to Colombia and Venezuela. Then Gongora galeata from Mexico, which is pretty well known with smaller inflorescence, apricot scented. Gongora grossa is pretty common in cultivation too. Gongora gratulabunda, which is endemic or exclusive from Colombia, is pretty easy to find too. And then Acineta, the most common one in cultivation is Acineta superba. And Coryanthes, you have 1 species that can more or less be easily purchased at orchid growers, which is Coryanthes macrantha. Then other species are pretty uncommon. So these species and genera of the Stanhopea subtribe are mainly distributed in countries that are neotropical, which means the new tropics, which means the Tropic of America. They don't exist outside of America, Central and South America, beginning from Mexico to Brazil and to Bolivia, including some species in the Caribbean islands like Trinidad and Tobago, for example. You have an altitudinal distribution from 0 meter or sea level to around 8,000 feet high, but this is pretty uncommon. Generally, most species are from warm to temperate climate, and generally from humid to very humid or wet regions. But some can withstand colder or drier seasons or climates for some species. You can purchase some species that are a bit easier to grow if you don't have that warmth, or here you don't have enough humidity in your greenhouse, for example, or your home. So there are very few studies that are focused on ecology of population, which means to understand, and reproductive biology, which means to know the plants in the wild, how they grow, which insect pollinate them. It's improving, but there's a lot of lack of information, and it's very important to study them, to understand how they grow, and to protect them also. If the methods which are like the taxonomic, for example, in taxonomy you have different methods to study orchids. You can classify them as it's been done for centuries, which is on morphology point of view, which means seeing how the shape of the plant, of the flower is, and classify them like this. But also you have now a DNA analysis, which is molecular analysis based on genetics. But there's also the study of plants in the wild, which is very important to understand. So I personally think that if you just study plants on morphology basis, it's just partial study. If you do the same with DNA, it's just partial study. You have just a third of the knowledge. But if you group the morphology, the DNA, and the study of the orchids, how they grow in the wild, which insect pollinate them, visit them and pollinate them, then you have a complete knowledge, and then you can really truly study a species or a genus or a subtribe and understand how they maintain a relationship with the environment and understand the plant truly, and also describe them very correctly. So, for example, which is very important in Stanhopea is the pollination. Also for every orchid, it's important. But it's very interesting in the Stanhopea subtribe, as it is for some other genera in other subtribes like Cattleya, for example. They are pollinized by euglossine bee, which is a tribe of bees. And you have an example on this picture of a Gongora fulva or close to fulva blooming in the wild in Colombia, visited by a euglossa bee. So the euglossine tribe is divided in 4 genera of bees, which are the Euglossa, Eulema, Euphrysia, and Exaerete. There's even a 5th one, but it's not that common. And they are known to visit and pollinate these flowers. There are different mechanisms, which are very interesting. Generally, it's known that these are the male bees that visit the flowers. So they are attracted by the scent, the strong scent of these flowers, and then they visit them to collect fragrances. So with their front legs, they grab the plant and they try to grab the perfume, and then they put some scent on their rear legs, and then with this scent, they improve the chance to mate with female bees. So it's like an exchange or a symbiosis on the level of reproduction in bee and pollination in between the orchid and these orchids and this kind of bees. The orchid is using the bee like this because the bee is attracted by the scent. The bee comes, try to grab the scent, to perfume itself, to mate easier, to reproduce easier with the females. But by doing this, they grab the pollen, or the pollen is sticking to them, to their head, their thorax, and then they transport the pollen from one flower of a plant to the flower of another plant, and they pollinate them. So the orchids benefit from the visit of the bee, and the bee benefits from the orchid because it rises the chance to mate and to reproduce with female bees. These are other pictures I took in the wild too of another euglossa bee. And then we can see that they are on the petals, and they are just grabbing to them and trying to get the fragrance. So this is a euglossa bee on Gongora gratulabunda flora in a natural reserve in the region where I live. It's another example in cultivation where I live. This is another genus. We had euglossa, which are very metallic, green, blue, coppery colored bees. very metallic and very nice ones, smaller ones. And then you have the big other bees from the same tribe, which are the Ulema. And so the Ulema are like a bit like bumblebees, but they are true bees. And so they are much heavier, much bigger, like sometimes half an inch or even a bit more long, very heavy. And they visit Stanhopeas mainly because these are bigger flowers. And you can see the approach of the bee towards the Stanhopea reichenbachia growing, and then it enters the lip and it tries to get the perfume. And by doing this, then at one moment it's very slippery and very waxy flower. And so it tries to grab to the flower and slips and then gets the pollen, which is just here on its back or on its head, and transport it to another flower. This is what I was telling you at one moment. The Coryanthes genus is very special. It has different specificity. One is that it grows in ants' nests. So you can see a Coryanthes with its leaves here, the plicate leaves again, with the nerves, strongly marked nerves, and it grows in ants' nest. So by doing that, the orchid benefits from two factors. One is that the ants are protecting fiercely the plant from aggression of humans who would try to get the plant, or from herbivore mammals or other insects, or which would try to eat the plant. So the ant protect the plant from dangers from outside. And also, on the other side, the orchid benefits of the fact that as it lives in this nest, the ants produce some substances that can help the orchid to grow better, because it gives the orchid like some fertilizers, like formic acid, etc. And so you have plants growing, Coryanthes growing in ants' nest, which is the most common you will see. Some can grow out of the ants' nest, but if it grows in the ants' nest, it's more protected from aggressions from outside, and also it grows much quicker and blooms much quicker, and so enhance the chance of reproducing, because it gives more flowers more often and quicker. So it helps reproduction and survival of the species. On the other side, the ant also benefited from two specific factors from the orchid, because the fact that the orchid grows in the ant's nest, the roots of the orchid is giving a better and stronger structure to the ant's nest, and the ant's nest is much more resistant than if it doesn't have the orchids growing and making a strong architecture for the nest. So these are, of course, epiphytic orchids growing on trees or on branches, and also ants that live in trees, not on the ground. And the other factor which benefits the ants is that when the plant is about to bloom, like this one on the right in cultivation, generally it produces some substances that are a little bit sweet, and the ants feed without damaging the orchid, but they feed on these substances, exudates, for example, which are sweet for the orchid, for the ant. So we have an example of a flower. This is Coryanthes elegantium from Colombia and Ecuador in the super wet Pacific lowlands. And you can see the structure is very strange, because it's called in English the bucket orchid, because the lip is very complex, very waxy, and you have like a kind of bucket here. So the lip is opened on the upper side, and the bees which pollinate them are attracted by the strong scent. They arrive, just the flower opens, and half an hour after, there are like 10 bees around it, and the bees can smell the orchids 2 kilometers away, which is very far away. We personally can smell them like 3, 4, 5 meters away. And so the bees are approaching the orchid. And what they do is trying to get the fragrance, as I was telling you, the perfume of the flower. So they grab to the flower, but this is very waxy and slippery, and generally the bee falls into the hole here, the kind of bucket. And the fact is that the orchid is producing a liquid. You can see a little bit this here. There are like two appendages here, which produce a liquid, which falls one drop after the other. There's like two small appendages, and they produce this liquid. This liquid falls slowly, one drop after another. And when the bee falls into the bucket, then it gets its wings wet and it cannot fly anymore, so it cannot escape flying. And it cannot neither escape from trying to grab the walls or the lateral parts of the lip because it's too waxy and slippery. So the only way to exit is going through a small tube or canal here, where the bee can grab some small hairs, which helps it grab and get outside of the flower. And by doing this, the exit is a bit smaller than the size of the bee, and the bee has to push its way to get out of the flower. And by doing this, then it grabs the pollen. So that's why I was telling there are not insectivorous or carnivorous plants, but they grab and trap the insect and then release it. But there's only one way. If the bee is attracted and is too big, it's in another species which is also attracted by the scent, it can die because possibly it cannot get out. If it's too small, then it goes easily outside and doesn't grab the pollen. So everything is perfect because it's only the right bee which grabs the pollen. So we have an example here in cultivation, and the bee has been trapped, and then it's trying to escape from the flower and pushing its way. And sometimes it doesn't work. Maybe it was not a good one because it doesn't have pollen on it. So everything is more or less perfect, but sometimes something is failing or it's just not the right bee. So this is an Odontoglossum bee on a Coryanthes misasi, which is a species just present in Colombia. We have Stanhopea blooming in the wild again, the same one we saw at the beginning, but the other plant I could see once blooming in 10 years, going into the forest. This is Stanhopea Reichenbachia. And you can see there are other bugs, but these bugs are like weevils and small carabs. Well, these are not the pollinators. They just damage the flower, trying to grab the fragrance too, but they are too small and not going on the lip, so they cannot grab the pollen. So there are other insects attracted by the scent, but they are not the pollinators. They are just visitors. We have another factor which is very interesting and has been described by Dodson, which was a very famous investigator from USA, which studied orchids in Colombia, Ecuador. You have what Dodson described as the anti-pollinator, which means that there's a crab spider here. This is not a Stanhopea in a plant, this is on a Maxillaria, but it's just to illustrate the purpose. So you have this crab spider, which is hiding next to the lip of the plant, and when the potential pollinator will approach the flower, then this spider can grab it and kill it. So the pollinator or the potential pollinator is attracted by the flower, but it has no chance to survive, so no chance to pollinate the flower, so it's called an anti-pollinator because it kills the potential pollinator. Now I have to tell you that there are some natural hybrids apart from the species that can be found in nature. For example, this one, which is in cultivation, but it's a wild plant that has been found and cultivated, which is Stanhopea heranusiana. There is an X before heranusiana because it's a hybrid, but it's a natural hybrid created by the fact that the two parents, which are Stanhopea tricornis and Stanhopea reichenbachia, grow together in the same forest, and they attract the same bee. So the bee is able to catch the pollen of one of the species and put it on the other flower of the other species, and then what is produced is a natural hybrid, also very scented. But there are also hybrids created by man-made created hybrids between different species of Stanhopea, different species of Gongora, of Coryanthes, and also intergeneric hybrids, which means that you mix different genera like Stanhopea with Coryanthes, Acineta with Stanhopea, and for example, Acineta by Stanhopea is Acinopea, or Coryanthes by Stanhopea is called Coryopea. These are man-made hybrids, and you cannot find intergeneric hybrids in the wild, at least not in this subtribe. Many species have been described without enough precision, which is a problem because then, or without precise location. For example, this Acineta murray was just described as from Colombia, but we're in Colombia. It's a pretty big country. It's 2 times the size of France. So where can we find the species? Fortunately, I found it, and other friends, which are biologists, found some other population, and now we can say where it came from. But for more than a century, it was just known as to come from a big country, which is Colombia, and no precision, which altitude, which kind of forest, which region of Colombia. So we need much more investigation in the wild to understand the species, their pollination, and how they distribute, if they are very located in just a region or more widespread, etc. Color is generally not a criteria for identification. So people are mainly, most of the time, fooled by this. They think, for example, that these are two different species because the colors are different and the flower opens a little bit more in one specimen than the other. But these are just two different colored Stanhopea, Acineta superba. This is in Venezuela, this is in Colombia, but this is the same leaf exactly. If you dissect the flower and analyze the lip, it's exactly the same. It's just a kind of flower. As in Cattleya, you have alba, tipo, semi-alba, splash with different colors, but this doesn't mean that a Cattleya trianae alba is a different species than a Cattleya trianae, which is pink color. It's just two color variety. This is another example with Acineta murray, a white one and a yellow one, but it's exactly the same species with different colors. So this is not a criteria. And most of the time on internet, you have confusion because people try to say, this is this species because it's this color. No, color, you have forget color. Analyze morphology, not color. And so this is why I made this picture to show that we can have even two species with the same color. And these are very different two species. One is much bigger, the other one is smaller. But also the lip, look at the lip shape. It's like V-shaped in the end. This one is completely different lip. The front lobe of the lip is completely different. We can see it from the side, from the front. They are different, but they have mostly the same color. And if we analyze even further on, the pollinia, the rust elum, which is the reproductive part, they are different too. Look, the shape is different. The color is similar, but the shape is different. Here are two dissected lips, and look what I was telling you. One lip of Acineta superba on the upper flower, and on the lower flower Acineta murray, and you have completely different flowers when you analyze the dissected lip. So this is necessary for Stanhopea, for Acineta, to understand better the species, to make dissection. And you can see that the shape of the lip is pretty different. The callus, which is this part, is completely different. It's a bit similar, but it's very different. And this means that it has a different morphology to attract a different insect. And so this is a very strong criteria to differentiate species, because you don't have the same attraction, the same scent, the same pollinator. And then this is a very strong feature to show that these are biologically two different species. Another picture to show this, two Stanhopea, which has been pretty confused, Stanhopea schilleriana here and Stanhopea gibbosa. People confusedly constantly in cultivation. But if you make a picture from the side view, which is very necessary to identify Stanhopea, if you don't have a picture from a perfect side view, it's impossible to be sure. Well, some are very different and unique, but you have very close species that look alike, and the color can vary or be similar. But then you dissect the flora and you also analyze the shape of and the morphology of the lip, and it's different, and then the scent is different, and these are the true criteria to identify species. So in Colombia, new species are still to be discovered and still described. Each year you have new registers, new species that were not known for Colombia or neighboring countries, or new species in the wild. For example, after like in 2021, in 2 years ago, Stanhopea asloviana has been found in Colombia, and it was supposed to exist exclusively in Peru. So we have it in Peru, we have it in Colombia. It's not discovered yet in Ecuador. Maybe it's also present in Ecuador. This is a lack of information and lack of study. So let's see now pictures of these main genera. You have Stanhopea, and we'll see species from Colombia. So Stanhopea annulata, here on its log, growing in the wild, blooming in the wild. You have the general plant blooming in the wild. Again, duplicate leaf with strong nerves. And you have small flowers, because this species is part of a group of Stanhopea with small flowers, like 1.5 inch, for example. So Stanhopea annulata, which is characterized by the fact that around the lip there is a ring, all around the ring, which is said in the name. Annulata in Latin means the ringed Stanhopea. So another picture of this one with two floral spikes open. Some flowers had been eaten by a bug and others were in good shape. Another species which has a bit smaller flora but bigger than this one, but it's very handsome, is Stanhopea conata, which is from southern Colombia next to Ecuador. Very nice species. Then we have Stanhopea gibosa that I was showing you the comparison with another one just before when we dissect the lip in cultivation and in the wild in Ecuador in this case, but it also exists at the border with Colombia. So Stanhopea gibosa. Then we have the same one blooming in the wild, two different plants pictured in the wild. I've been lucky enough to be able to see 12 Stanhopea species blooming in the wild and picture them, which is very hard to realize to do because as I was telling you, it's like just blooming 3-4 days, and I had to travel a lot and to insist to see some species. Go back years after years in the same environment, have the plants located, and come back at different seasons of the year, etc. You have Stanhopea geniciana, which is pretty common in cultivation. So you have plants with few dots or completely yellow sometimes, or yellow is yellow with like a kind of eye. It's not a true eye, of course, but it's a dot which looks like an eye in the center, but a small one. Some Stanhopea have a big dot which looks like a very big eye in the lip. And then you have variety of Stanhopea geniciana which are more orangey than yellow and with much more dots. And it's very cinnamon scented. We have Stanhopea platyceras, which is endemic from Colombia. It's or maybe shared with Panama, but we're not sure. For a moment, it's just known from Colombia. So it's the biggest Stanhopea in Colombia, a very big one, almost as big as Stanhopea tigrina, so like 5 inches, 6 inches wide. We have the one we saw at the beginning, Stanhopea reichenbachiana, which is one of my preferred ones, with a very massive lip, very white flowers. The same plant, close-up of the flower and the plant blooming in the wild on its very humid log in the super wet jungles. The other plant of this species I've seen once in the wild, and the plant I grew, which is like dot spotted with some purple on and in the lip, which is another variety of color. Stanhopea schilleriana. By the way, I put a picture of some buds because the buds are as impressive generally as the flowers. Of course, they don't smell yet, but they are very nice buds too. And the schilleriana blooming at home. So as it's growing close to where I live, sometimes I found small fallen plants and I put them on trees just next to home. This is the same species blooming in the wild, again, in the forest just next to where I live. Very handsome one. A fragrance which is more like tropical fruits, soft tropical fruits. Then you have Stanhopea stevensonii, which is another endemic, which means exclusive species from Colombia. And you have this one, which is a very pale form. And this one is not even really well known what it is. It could be a variety of stevensonii, but we're not sure. And the problem is that I bought this plant to an orchid producer in Colombia. He doesn't know where he got the plant from. So we don't know if he got it from Colombia, if he bought it to a Peruvian or Ecuadorian grower. So we don't even know if it comes from Colombia, but probably yes. And we cannot know if it's a natural hybrid. If we would know where it comes from, we could go back to the forest and try to see which species grow there. And there are different species growing together. It could be a natural hybrid, another one, but we don't know until we know where it comes from. Stanhopea tricornis, which is a very, very scented plant. This is a plant in cultivation at home, and this is a big plant growing in the wild and blooming under the plant. This is very, very strongly scented, very strong tropical fruit scent, and it's considered like ancestors of Stanhopea. They are a bit more simple. The flowers are less elaborated, so they are more like considered that these are the first kind of Stanhopea that appeared, and then the other one got a more complex structure and developed or evolution, got a different kind of evolution, and they are more recent in natural history. This is Stanhopea tricornis blooming in the wild, and I was smelling it. The plant, a close-up of the flora we saw just before in the wild. Stanhopea wardi on the left, a plant in cultivation, on the right, a plant on the border of the road, and with the bee approaching it, as it's in the natural habitat. The same Stanhopea wardi, it was growing in Venezuela in a big fork of a tree above a coffee plantation. And you can see the plant growing with a fern, and the flowers were here. And with a zoom, I could make some picture of the flower here. So it's a pretty common species in cultivation. And then we leave Stanhopea for Embrea, which I already showed you to illustrate the single-flowered flower spike. This is a very big one. You see my hand, it's in cultivation. You can see my hand just next to the flower, and it's Embrea, which is a very handsome genera. Just 2 species that are known until now. Then you have the Gongoras. Gongora garayana is a very nice one, endemic or exclusive from Colombia. We'll see another species from this group of Gongora afterwards. The more typical shaped flowers of Gongora. So I will show you something. This is a Gongora aromatica, almost white variety, but it can be yellow or pinkish colored. And then Gongora chocoensis at the end of the blooming season in the very tropical, super wet forest of the Pacific. But then you can see that these flowers, they have a flower spike and the flowers with the lip and the flowers looking like inside toward the flower spike, the central axis. But if I go back to this one, you can see the flower spike and the flowers and the lip are looking like outside, which is very special in Gongora. It's not common. The flowers are like with the lip getting out of the flower spike instead of inside. And then you can see even the peduncle is like twisted to allow this here. And this is a group of 2 or 3 or 4 species, 3 in Colombia and maybe 4 or 5 in total in Latin America. So they are a bit different and bigger flowers. Gongora fulva, 2 different varieties, a yellow one and a more colored one in cultivation and in the wild. Gongora gratulabunda, which is one of the ones that is pretty often seen in cultivation. What is very typical of this species is that you can see, I'm searching for the arrow, yes, the lip is here, the petals here, the lip is here, and the lip is connected to the rest of the flower by this appendage, which is called sigmoid, which means forming an S, which is typical of the species. The others don't have this. If I go back, look, it's more massive. Here it's a bit longer, but it's straight. And in this case, it's completely forming an S. This is typical of Gongora gratulabunda, which is exclusive from Colombia. And it's one of the biggest flowers in Gongora. And here you have the flower, the plant blooming in the wild with 4 or 5 bees around it, crazy about the scent. Others, Gongoras from Colombia, Charontis, smaller flowered on the left, Gongora lagunae on the right, which is shared with Venezuela. And then again, these Gongoras, portentosa, with the flowers and the lip looking outwards instead of inwards of the inflorescence. Very nice ones and very big flowers. Here on the right is a Gongora species, unidentified, but close to fulva, with a lot of bees. You see the flowers open and a lot of bees are going around it because of the scent. Coryanthes in the wild, so this one that grab the insects and then trap the insect and release them. A plant with buds here, growing in the wild. Here in Mexico, this is in Venezuela, this is in Mexico, growing with this Coryanthes is growing in the ant's nest, as I was explaining here. And on the upper side of the ant's nest, there's another orchid with Epidendrum flexuosum. So other orchids can grow together in ant's nest. This is the biggest Coryanthes flower, and this is the heaviest orchid flower known until now, 100 grams. Just one flower is weighing 100 grams. This is Coryanthes bruckmülleri, shared among Venezuela and Colombia. Very massive flower in cultivation. And here a plant that I was lucky to see in the wild, blooming in the wild in Venezuela. Very hard to find in nature, blooming in nature. Another picture of this plant in the wild, blooming in the wild, Coryanthes bruckmülleri. Other Coryanthes in cultivation. This is an undescribed species, new to science. So it's called Species novon. because it's new to science. Then Coryanthes gernoti, blooming in the wild. And I grabbed a picture to identify it correctly. But of course, there were different plants blooming, and I didn't damage the plant, but just grab a flower. And a fourth Coryanthes I could see blooming in the wild, which is Coryanthes marstersiana. We can see it very well, the small ant nest here. It can be bigger. Sometimes the leaves of the Coryanthes, the flower here, it was pretty far away from me. So with the zoom, I could make a picture of the flower. Just some pictures of other Coryanthes. Like this, you can see how special and impressive they are. Other species, Leucocoris. Macrantha is the one that is a bit more commonly seen in cultivation. Others, Misacei, exclusive to Colombia. This one is another one, which is a Amazonian species, Sengasiana. Then Acineta, some plants in cultivation. Acineta erythroxanthis, which is completely yellow. Acineta murray, we've seen it before, but different plants again blooming in the wild. Superba, as I was showing before. This is a very special orchid. It's called the chocolate orchid because it's very scented. It's not common in cultivation. It's Bremia vittata, very strongly scented to chocolate, a warm grower from very warm and humid jungles. Haelterman, we've seen the young guy making some pictures of it, but then we see close-up of it. It's very scented, as the name indicates. Odoratissima means very scented. Again, different varieties. You can see strong red or more dotted, spotted. Bicolored, yellow and very wine red, or completely yellow, which are very rare varieties. Again, just varieties of color. Haelterman, this is Wallisii. I have to modify it. This is an error. Haelterman Wallisii, a very nice one, a smaller flower, but very nice yellow one. The Cattleya genus, I was telling you, small flowers, very rare, but very nice. And close to Acineta, is called Luedemaniana, with hanging very strong inflorescences. Paphinia in the wild, I've been lucky to see it twice blooming in the wild. Paphinia rugosa, very scented and blooming in very wet forests. It's exclusive to Colombia. Polycycnis, which is very nice, and it has a very long column, looking like a swan neck, which is polycycnis means cycnis is swan, and poly is numerous, abundant. So we have a lot of flowers with a column looking like a swan's neck, so it's called polycycnis because of this. So blooming in the wild, again, very nice flowers and scented. Polycycnis barbata that I grow, very hairy lip. The Schlimia, we are almost at the end. Schlimia genus, which is very special. It's more, looks like a small nun. So from cloud forest, it's more cold grower in this case, 2, 3 to 6 flowers. Staying for 6 days flowering. Look, it's in the wild. Very nice ones. Schlimia, not very well known and not easy to grow. And Civekingia, which is like a small Stanhopea, also illustrated that it can be grown in baskets to allow the inflorescences to hang. Civekingia suavis. And these are 2 flowers I made, one at home, Civekingia reichenbachana, and I've been able to make this picture, this selfie, with 2 of the bees that were attracted by this. One could be the pollinator. And just next to me, they were not afraid because they were so fascinated by the sand that I could make the picture being just next to the flower. And then Stanhopea schilleriana, a very special variety, completely yellow, like a xanthina one, without red dots, in the wild close to where I live, and I was very happy to find this variety. So as a final reflection, well, I hope you liked this talk, but of course, I want to make an emphasis to the fact that we work and we grow and we work with and we grow orchids that can be very endangered sometimes, and each time rarer in the wild because of environmental destruction and poaching, because it still exists a lot in Latin America. So we have a strong responsibility growing orchids, and try to grow them the best you can, to get plants that you are sure are not poached, and that are reproduced from seeds, because these are species that have the right to survive, and we cannot be, as humans, just for our pleasure, putting these species in danger, of course. and let's try to reproduce what we can in cultivation to lower the pressure on wild populations. So have a good night. I hope you were interested by the talk and you like the topic, and that you had a good night. So this is my contact. Just stay my contact. Let my contact with my email, Instagram, and Facebook page, and 2 nature travel agencies with whom I work as a guide.